Israel been real quiet since the fundraiser stream, hasn't it, folks? Took the ceasefire? I don't know. Sounds like they're a little chicken. Knew we were stepping up. That the Palestine Children's Relief Fund was going to be so overfunded that Israeli airstrikes, the damage would be repaired as soon as it was done. Like a cartoon cloud of PCRF doctors, you know? A building gets airstriked, and then the cloud appears around it with like the hammers and like the hands popping out of it to indicate work being done, and then pow! Israel was going to run out of money with all those damn rockets. Burn out that $4 billion a year in military aid from the U.S. Anyway, the ceasefire happened. There were no reports of violations of an agreement that went into effect on Friday, bringing nearly 2 weeks of violence to an end. Love that language, baby. Thanks, New York Times. Bringing nearly 2 weeks of violence to an end. You know, equal violence, committed and received equally by both sides. A minor skirmish broke out between the Israeli police and Palestinians outside the Aqsa Mosque in Jerusalem. And, you know, this is a very long article. I read it, actually, this morning. And it is just replete with language that I, let's say, take great issue with. This article is just packed full of that both sides bullshit, you know? Why Biden used a light touch while pressing Netanyahu. As violence raged between Israeli and Hamas for 10 days. Between Israeli? Don't you mean Israel or Israelis? Israeli? Is that grammatically correct? Anyway, plenty of non-Hamas died, you know, so again, framing this just as a direct conflict. President Biden spoke with Netanyahu, the Israeli prime minister, privately 6 times, conversations in which he pressed him to answer a simple question: how does this end? Biden's tactic was to avoid public condemnation of Israel's bombing of Gaza, or even a public call for a ceasefire, fucking coward, in order to build up capital with Mr. Netanyahu and then exert pressure in private when the time came. Hey, you know how you can actually exert pressure on Netanyahu? Push the Democratic Party to vote to amend future funding bills so that Israel doesn't get military aid. That would be an actual good way of pressuring them. Jesus. In private conversations, Mr. Biden and other American officials reiterated to the Israelis that they had achieved some significant military objectives against Hamas, the militant group that fired thousands of rockets at Israel from Gaza, including targeting its tunnel network. Note, by the way, and you can see this for the entire goddamn article, is that they consistently frame this as some kind of necessary defensive action Israel took against Hamas. The human casualties suffered by the innocent Palestinian people, the millions and millions and millions of dollars of damage done to the Gaza Strip, the countless buildings that were destroyed, all of it glazed over in favor of this sanitized narrative where it was just Israel doing what needed to be done against Hamas. Not the first time the New York Times has played this. People say New York Times is a leftist rag. Yeah, fucking right. No. They have a long history of fielding articles that take this attitude towards the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Anyway, it goes on for a very long time. The rockets may have stopped, but Palestinians are no less angry. I encourage you all to read this article yourself, by the way. I would, but you can see the scroll thing down here. It would take us 2 hours to read it. An Egyptian-brokered ceasefire between Hamas and Israel may have hit pause in the formal hostilities, but unrest flaring in Jerusalem and the West Bank on Friday made clear Palestinians still felt they had plenty to fight for. If anything, the conflict between Israel and Hamas only inflamed the Palestinian quest for greater rights and recognition, demonstrators said, with the truce doing next to nothing to address the broader inspiration for the rocket fire and stone throwing. Hours after the rockets and airstrikes stopped, tear gas veiled Jerusalem's Al-Aqsa Mosque and Israeli security forces stormed the holy compound an echo of the police raids 2 weeks ago that preceded the deadliest fighting between Israelis and Palestinians in years. This is good. Yes, I like the stone throwing being thrown alongside the rocket fire. You know, the impenetrable Palestinian military offensive of rocket fire and stone throwing, kind of underlines the the imbalance in this conflict. In a Jerusalem neighborhood overlooking the mosque, the Israeli police tried to contain a crowd of hundreds of Palestinians carrying the flag of Hamas, the militant group that controls Gaza. Notice, the whole crowd of Palestinians were carrying the flag of Hamas. That's it. The people protesting against Israel, they were all Hamas supporters. The police used stun grenades to chase away protesters who had thrown stones and fireworks on them. They cleared that entire... Does anyone have... Link me the article. The article and them clearing these protesters? And in several places across the West Bank, Israeli soldiers used rubber bullets and live rounds to disperse Palestinians demonstrating after Friday prayers. In all, the Red Crescent said 97 Palestinians were injured in the West Bank and Jerusalem on Friday. At least they didn't. Yeah. Live rounds. We as Palestinians will continue struggling to achieve our freedom, said Imad Mohammed, 47, a trader from Ramallah in the West Bank, because the Israeli occupation of our land and people has not ended. They describe more violence committed by the Israeli police officers. To Palestinians, the clashes, like the fighting with Hamas, illustrated the disproportionate force used by Israel. Okay? It also demonstrated the larger asymmetry, they said, in which Israel holds most of the weapons, money, and international backing, while blockading Gaza and denying Palestinians basic rights. Good, good. Though both sides claimed victory on Friday, the ceasefire was unconditional. It was back to the old normal where tensions were never far from boiling over. One of the immediate causes of Palestinian anger remained as explosive as ever. Just because there's a ceasefire does not mean the death and destruction has ended, it doesn't mean the blockade is lifted, it doesn't mean those who lost their entire families will be rectified. We must continue our campaign to end the brutal siege and colonialism. Yes, okay. This is good, fine. Read the full article on the continuing Palestinian anger at Israel. This section was the one I probably found most agreeable. You can imagine, I think. The additional sections, for Israeli victory is hard to define, much less achieve. Biden said Democrats are still committed to Israel, but he walks a fine diplomatic line. Thanks, Biden. Some Israeli officials now regret destroying a building used by journalists. Ah, yes, the one the IDF claimed had Hamas activity. And then they proved it by quietly telling the U.S. government. And then the U.S. government said, I don't know. Quiet regret, you know. In light of the international furor over the airstrike, some high-ranking officials in government and the military now call it a mistake, arguing Israel needs the media to be open to hearing its version of events, and the bombing made that harder. Ah, okay. So the reason why it was wrong to airstrike this media outlet, of which there was no proof of Hamas activity, is because the optics were bad. I see. Video shot by Associated Press workers as they hustled out of the building trying to rescue a few cameras and computers were shared widely on news sites and social media around the world. One official said that while the airstrike was justified militarily, the doubters had been right, and the harm done to Israel's international standing outweighed any benefit from destroying Hamas equipment. Wait, how exactly... The doubters had been right, but it was justified militarily? The doubters are doubting there was any justification to airstrike the building. What are we talking about here? He's saying doubters in the IDF? Oh, I see. A senior Israeli military official said Hamas maintained a military intelligence facility in the building and used it as a base for equipment trying to jam Israeli communication and satellite navigation systems. Hamas has denied having any operations in the building. Can we get some proof of this, maybe? Not just a quiet conversation with Biden that nobody in the State Department is able to back up, but maybe just a little bit of fucking proof? Any doubters in chat? I'm a doubter. Israeli officials said they conveyed to U.S. officials intelligence that they justified the strikes but have not made that information public. Earlier in the week, Secretary of State Antony Blinken has expressed concern about the bombing. Oh, yeah, dude, we told your intelligence officials about it. You know, we just didn't tell your Secretary of State. Also, Why is this information classified? The building has already been airstriked. If there's evidence, why wouldn't you release it? Seriously, guys, what information could they have had that they would not now be free to release now that the building has already been turned into dust? What? It's already happened. Wait, are you going to tip off Hamas that the building is going to be airstriked a week ago? What? And even if Hamas was there, that doesn't justify the airstrike. There are better ways of handling this. I'm sure there is some way of handling this without fucking blowing up press facilities or sharing the info with them privately, or I don't know, some sort of direct communication to the heads of the press in these buildings to try and like inform them. Something? A lot of the reason information is secret is how the information was obtained. That's true. They could have a Hamas informant, but man, why couldn't they share it privately with somebody trustworthy and then that person could say, yeah, this information was valid? Why not Associated Press? The Associated Press is one of the most reputable news organizations on the planet. You can't disclose information to one of their editors under like top secret pretense. Say, this is off the record. I'm telling you this now so you know there was a good reason. And then that AP editor can say like, yeah, we're not at liberty to discuss this information, but we can say the Israeli government has provided us a justifiable explanation for why they used their attack again. Like, something? Something. There has to be something. Am I being naive here? I think this could be done if they had evidence to share. Okay? It goes on for a while. Frustrated Israelis say nothing was changed by the fighting. Yeah, they didn't even get any new territory out of it. Damn. That sucks. Look. The ceasefire being unconditional is not acceptable, okay? You know what Israel wants right now, and is probably one of the reasons why they engage in police brutality while clearing out those protesters? It's because they want Hamas to fire rockets again so that Israel has a pretense for re-engaging with military activity, okay? They want to press and press and press until inevitably conflicts break again, and then Israel has some defensive justification, knowing fully well that Hamas, being a terrorist organization, is not going to be particularly, you know, they're not going to exercise much restraint. Who started the conflict? Who fired the first rocket? In the context of the broader relationship between Gaza and Israel, I think that question is utterly irrelevant. The entire situation in which Palestinian people live is maintained by the Israeli government. From the sanctions, to the blockades, to the denial of basic human rights, to the war crimes, to the everything, the rocket they fired is much bigger. It's the rocket of genocide, okay? It's a big rocket. I don't particularly care who starts the conflict in any instance, whether it's Israel or Hamas, because no matter who started the conflict in any individual act of retribution or violence or what have you here and now, the broader context must be addressed by the power of the Israeli government. And by the way, a ceasefire here is not enough. The Israeli government must pledge to use its resources to rebuild the parts of Gaza that were destroyed through their bombing. This is what happened over and over and over again. A little tussle, some conflict, more Palestinians die than Israelis. The Israeli damage, the damage done to Israel, quickly rebuilt. Their country has money. They put resources towards it. Gaza remains a shithole, a bombed-out shithole, forever, because they don't have the resources to build anything. It's just a shaky collection of tenements and concrete that occasionally gets reduced to rubble, pushed out of the way slightly, and some new shaky building gets put up in its place. Maybe. It's one of the most overcrowded places on Earth. Do you know what the population density of Gaza is? Well, I don't know the exact number myself, so why don't we ask? Gaza's population density, 5,046 per square kilometer. The third most densely populated polity in the world. 5,046 per square kilometer. Let's take a look at New York City. New York City population density. per square kilometer, not square mile. km squared. Thank you. Oh, I see. Okay, New York City blows it out of the water. Ha! Probably because it's just one big city instead of a broader population. Maybe it would be more fair to compare it to a state. What is a polity? That was the word used. An identifiable political entity. Any group of people who have a collective identity who are organized by some... Okay, so let's compare it to, say, Japan. Just all of Japan, then. Because not all of Gaza is like a city. Okay, yeah, there you go. Japan is 347 inhabitants per square kilometer. Gaza's 5,000. Because there are portions of Gaza that aren't like an industrialized city-state. 80% of Japan is uninhabitable mountain. Well, it's difficult to make a direct comparison because cities like Tokyo and cities like New York City are built to accommodate high population densities. That's the thing. Like, take a look at the New York City skyline. The population density there is justified by the skyscrapers and the megacities. Let's take a look at the Gaza skyline. I wish that was a stat. I don't just want to hear about population density. I want population density proportional to urban development. That stat doesn't exist, you know? It's possible that you can have a city that has twice the population density of Gaza, but feels like it has a quarter of the population density, you know? Yeah, this is what I mean by, like, gray concrete tenements. Sheesh. Maybe just the height of buildings? Well, sure, but it's not just, like, what are the buildings used for, you know? I mean, look at the quality of these buildings. Like, what's the Jerusalem city skyline look like? Jerusalem skyline. Give me a good picture, goddammit. Jesus, that's beautiful. Wonder if I'll ever get to visit. It looks almost... It reminds me almost of a Mediterranean town, doesn't it? A little bit? What about Tel Aviv? Yes, the levels of... the comparative levels of industrialization are just incomparable. And this is what Tel Aviv looks like. Look at those skyscrapers. It is Mediterranean? Well, yes, I know. It's just, when I think Mediterranean, I think like Greek, you know? Not like, not Israel. But I guess, yes, it is all technically Mediterranean. It's just not what I think of. When I think Mediterranean food, I don't think like Israeli food, you know? Yeah. But I suppose that's true. Expand your mind, people. Yes. Well, anyway, the point that I'm trying to get at is Israel should rebuild all of Gaza, and then it should chill and allow Palestine to be a recognized political entity and blah, blah, blah. Okay. Got in the weeds a bit there. It's all the same fucking food. Why are they fighting? Do you think Israeli food and Greek food are the same? I'm genuinely asking. I don't know. I've never actually had Israeli food, but Israeli food is good. I don't doubt it. It's not British food. Greek food blows. Okay. All right. Okay. All right. Okay. Skip it down, people. Stop. Cut the segment. Stop. We're not getting into this, okay? Cut it down.